On today's show, the Miami Heat and Boston Celtics are headed for a Game 7 back in Boston. What happened in this series for the Miami Heat to lose control after being up 3-0? Why is Jimmy Butler struggling over these last handful of games? What has to happen in Game 7 for Miami to be able to get back to the NBA Finals? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's Eastern Conference Finals Game 7, and I think I'm taking Jayson Tatum to score more than 26.5 points. Or what about Bam Adebayo to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Jimmy Butler to have less than 6.5 assists? Or what about Jalen Brown to have fewer than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's not just the NBA. They've got you for NFL, MLB, NHL, everything. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals, currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. And right now, every day of the NBA playoffs and finals, one Prize Picks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. But you have to download the app to find out how. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Heat, David Ramil, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Heat. And David, we are headed for a Game 7, which seemed unthinkable just a few games ago with where this series was early on, Miami going up 3-0, and to lose in the way that they lost Game 6 on their home floor. You get Jimmy Butler hits the clutch free throws, and then Derek White with the last second tip in. How do you even begin to unpack what that does for this series, the momentum that it gives Boston headed back to Game 7 on their home court, all of that?
It's a next to impossible. You have to kind of just focus on the next step, because I think, everybody wants to harp, and rightfully so. It was an incredible moment, the last few seconds of the game there, and what happened with Derek White's layup. And at the same time, they wouldn't have been in that position had Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo played to the level that we've expected to see them over the course of the playoffs. And both of those players admitted that in their post-game press conference. And so I think the focus is just saying, you know what? They play better. Miami has a chance to win. As unlikely as that is, that's the focus moving forward. Everything that happened in Game 6, everything that's happened in the 3 previous games, none of it matters. You go to Game 7, and you look at that as the start of a new series with a chance at 48 minutes and advancing into the NBA Finals. That's the only way you can look at it, because if you start to focus on what happened at the end of Game 6, you'll never get out of your own head. You'll never be able to compete at a high level, and that's what this group expects themselves to do.
I know you just said that the previous games kind of don't matter. You have to crumple it up, throw it out. But what lessons can this Heat team maybe learn from these past 3 games, the past 3 losses, compared to earlier in the series, right, where they won the first 2 games and then they were dominant in that third game, right, just completely blew out Boston. And then it kind of seems like the tables have just been turned over these last 3 games.
Well, I think water rises to its level, right? And I think we saw Boston playing poorly over the course of those first 3 games and kind of rediscover their identity. I've said it before on the podcast. They've out-Miami'd Miami, and the way that they've brought their intensity, they're playing with more intent. That's a big word that we've seen over the course of the series. Just you can't waste any kind of moments. You can't go out there for possessions and just expect things to happen. You have to go and make those things happen in your favor. And Boston has done that much more effectively over the last 3 games. We saw it kind of even out to an extent in Game 6. At least that was my takeaway from that, is that Miami wind up playing more effectively. They didn't look as lost as they had in Games 4 and 5. And again, they put themselves in a position where they could have won easily had Jimmy and Bam not shot 24% combined from the floor. So I think that's the focus there, is that Boston has done really well. Miami has kind of figured it out. you approach this with the same level of intensity you showed in the first 3 games and what you showed for half of game 6, and maybe you have yourself a chance there to escape with a win in Boston. Very unlikely, but that's the focus.
Jimmy showed up, multiple times late in that game 6, the clutch free throws, the big 3-pointer late in the game, all that. But yet another game where he's, the efficiency's not there. He looks like he's really struggling. He's getting swatted left, right, and center by seemingly every player on the Celtics roster at this point. What has kind of changed for Jimmy specifically? Is there something that the Celtics defense is keying in on more with him that's making it harder for him to get to his spots or be comfortable when he's taking his shots?
They've been much more physical with him. I think they've also stopped biting on his pump fakes. It was a good way for him to create space. And I think as much as Celtics fans might not think that's the case, I've given full credit to Boston. I also think that there is some lingering impact from his injury and everything else. As much as he's played so many long stretches over the course of this postseason, I think it's starting to take its toll on him. Like even yesterday, as he was entering his post-game press conference, sitting down, he was aching. He was complaining. He looked like he was 70 as he was about to sit down for his post-game presser. So I think it's certainly an impact. It's not an excuse. It really is just an explanation. I think he's hurt. He doesn't have the same lift he showed earlier in the postseason when he was dominating against Milwaukee. He had 11 shots that he missed in the paint. 11 in the paint. That's unbelievable. For him to be as good as he was earlier in the postseason and for him to look relatively human, normal, maybe even mediocre. Yeah, he had that fourth quarter, but he looked completely lost for the first 3 quarters of the game. Just not very effective. He started off with 3 of 19. Not a good way for him to go out. So I think they've done a great job of defending him, putting more pressure on him, keeping him away from his preferred spots. They've done a really good job of putting Jayson Tatum on him. His length and size has been a problem for Jimmy to overcome. Even he's not been able to take advantage of any kind of mismatches. He keeps seeking them versus Derek White or Al Horford, and they've responded as well as you could possibly expect. Both of those blocking his shots. Robert Williams blocking a 3-point attempt. It hasn't been a good series for Jimmy. I think that's an understatement. But you hope that maybe he has some way of finding a way to muster whatever he can for Game 7.
On the other side, Jayson Tatum, Jalen Brown, they got to the foul line combined 25 times in Game 6. How much of that was just poor defense, poor defensive execution by Miami versus just a favorable whistle maybe going their way a little bit in Game 6?
I don't think you really want my opinion on that because I tend to see it more as the latter. I think there were you look at the replays, and I know that's kind of, that you're always going to find some fault in it if you slow it down. At the same time, there were a number of calls there where it looked like Tatum was like falling out of bounds, not due to any kind of push or contact or anything like that. He gets called for a whistle. The whistle has been it's kind of been uneven. I never point to officiating as a problem, and I won't do that right now. But I think when you're asking about the number of trips to the line, I think you have to look at it as that Boston has a clear edge in that department. You would have thought that Jimmy would be able to even it out. That wasn't the case. 15 trips alone for Jayson Tatum, who's allowed, and I'll be quite frank, he's allowed to throw his shoulder to create space when he's got a smaller defender, even a bigger defender. We see Jaylen Brown doing the same thing. When Gabe Vincent switches onto them, Tatum and Brown both create space by throwing that right elbow, and all of a sudden, hey, they've got an unchecked jumper available to them. There's a reason why. And if you apply any kind of pressure on them, they're going to get the whistle. It is what it is. Again, I don't look at that as anything but you have to accept it. You have to live with it. 24% is the number I'm looking for. If Bam and Jimmy shoot 40 or 50%, this is completely, the game's over and all of a sudden Miami's in the finals.
What needs, and maybe you might as well just have answered the question right there, but I mean, what specifically are you looking for that needs to happen in Game 7 here in Boston for Miami to walk away with a win and get themselves back to the finals?
There really isn't anything specific. Again, playing with that purpose, playing with intent, shooting better, but they got their shots yesterday. Everything that they needed in order to escape with a win in Game 6 was there. They shot better than 40% from 3-point range. They kept their turnovers down, only 5 for the whole game. They played as good a game as you possibly could expect. The difference was Jimmy and Bam. So if you get them playing better, you're going to get a win. And I think that's the reality of it. Now, you also, on the other side of things, you had Boston shooting their worst 3-point percentage of the season. I think that's you can't overlook that. That certainly was a factor. A lot of those were open looks. Miami did a very good job contesting those as well. You have to keep it going. That's basically it. They got the game plan, what they wanted out of Game 6. I'm not sure that they can duplicate it in Game 7. Again, it's going to be a miraculous effort for them to escape with a win, considering that they're the road team there. But if there's a team that has any chance at all, I'd like Miami's chances because they've just shown over the course of the postseason that they have the grit, the tenacity, all the intangibles that got them there in the first place. I don't know. Maybe they're one step away from escaping being on the wrong side of history. Who knows?
Who has more pressure here in this game 7? Is it Miami, who was up 3-0 and then let the series get to a game 7? Or is it Boston, who clawed their way back from a 3-0 deficit and has a chance to advance on their home court?
I that's a tough question. That's a really good one to think about, because you would think that Boston understands what's at stake, but they're playing so much less pressure free at this point. They are totally relaxed. As you were walking to the Heat locker room, you could hear the cheers coming from the Celtics locker room. They got a big win yesterday, and again, they have 3 straight. So I don't think they're feeling any pressure. And again, being at home, I think they're going into it almost as, what we can afford to take our foot off the gas to an extent, because we have all these advantages. We're playing so much better than Miami has over the last 3 games. So I think Miami's feeling all the pressure. Again, they go into the road, but this is also a team that, strangely enough, like to use a quote from Eric Spoelstra, this is a very gnarly group. They love that kind of pressure. They really love to be put on the spot, to be counted out, and to find a way to overcome those doubts. So it's kind of even. Both teams have a seeming equal amount of pressure, and at the same time, both of them free of that pressure to just go out. You got one game. Miami wasn't supposed to be in this place and this spot in the first place, and for them to be here with a chance at Game 7, that's as good good odds as you can hope for, considering they're the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. So I don't know. I would say it's even odds there as far as the amount of pressure both teams have.
One game left with a trip to the NBA Finals on the line. Of course, you'll have us covered for the results of that game and much more over at Locked On Heat. David, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Absolutely, anytime.